The turn of the century was a time of colossal growth for cities, specifically Chicago, not only in the size of new buildings or the buzzing city's industrial economy, but the population had risen exponentially too. The years between 1880 and 1914 experienced several changes in the city, such as the rise of the large meatpacking industry, a consumer culture, and also vice. But one of the most influential changes in Chicago was the spike in immigration numbers, turning the city from what was supposed to be gleaming into something that was tarnished by the poverty caused by overpopulation, leading to what were essentially slums filled with despair, sickness, and death. Chicago would soon need to turn to social welfare, put in the hands of private charities and programs to help impoverished immigrants. By far the most influential of these was Jane Addams and her Hull House organization, which set the tone for other social welfare programs, many of which live on today.
During the turn of the century, Chicago faced several issues with immigration, such as poverty and population, and they came up with several solutions to address the problem. Most of what caused the rapid growth in America was the flood of immigrants coming in from Europe at the time. There was a great deal of immigrants who came from Ireland, Germany, England, Switzerland, Italy, and then Chicago started to become one of the largest cities in terms of the rapid growth in population from immigrants. Between the years of 1870 to 1900s, Chicago grew from a city of 299,000 to nearly 1.7 million people. Due to a much larger rate of immigration over the rise in employment positions, many newcomers to Chicago had ended up unemployed and homeless. The diversity of the different immigrants in Chicago also caused several race riots, such as the 1919 race riot known as Red Summer. Eventually, there were more immigrants living in Chicago than actual natural born citizens, so there were more immigrants who owned homes at higher rates than native born people. Chicago's solutions consisted of asylums, poorhouses, and the first juvenile court, yet most of these did not work as well as the city thought. For a while, the gleaming city was dimmed by the littering of the unemployed immigrants and impoverished. That is, until Jane Addams came around.
Chicago seemed as though it would never be able to bounce back. That is, until Jane Addams founded Hull House in 1889, a settlement house meant to help immigrants and the impoverished to discover new opportunities for themselves. On September 6, 1860, Jane Addams was born into a wealthy family of 8 children in Cedarville, Illinois. However, Jane's mother had died during childbirth when she was 2, and by the time Addams was 8, she only had 4 siblings and a father who was a well-known politician. While growing up, Jane Addams developed big dreams of doing something useful in the world. As a teen, she aspired to become a doctor because she wanted to work and live among the poor. The inspiration to help those less fortunate came from her reading of Charles Dickens and her mother's kindness to the Cedarville poor. Jane went on to study at the Rockford Female Seminary in Illinois, but shortly after graduating, her father passed away and she inherited $50,000, which is the equivalent of $1.3 million today. After moving to Philadelphia with the rest of her family, Jane found it difficult to continue her medical studies with her health problems. Her dreams were crushed and she did not know what to do with her life. It was her stepbrother who gave her the idea to travel abroad, and it was in Europe that she realized that she did not need to become a doctor in order to help people. After returning home in Cedarville, Jane read Giuseppe Mazzini's Duties of Man, where she became inspired by democracy as a social ideal. It wasn't until the summer of 1887 that Addams picked up the idea for a settlement house from a magazine she read. She decided to travel to Europe once more to see the very first settlement house in London, called Toynbee Hall. It was then that her new dream would be to own a settlement house. She described her enchantment of it as
A community of university men who live there, have their recreation clubs and society all among the poor people. yet in the same style in which they would live in their own circle. It is so free of professional doing good, so unaffectedly sincere, and so productive of good results in its classes and libraries that it seems perfectly ideal.
In 1889, Jane Addams, along with her close friend Ellen Gates Starr, founded Hull House together. It was once a mansion that belonged to Charles Hull and was built in one of the more diverse and impoverished areas of Chicago. It needed some repairs, but it would work well as a settlement house. As repairs on the house began and news of what Jane Addams was creating leaked out, wealthy women began making their own contributions and donations to the house. To practice social democracy, the House included a comprehensive program of civics, cultural, recreational, and educational activities, along with clubs, theaters, libraries, galleries, and nurseries. Hull House was known as one of Addams' great legacies, for it still continues to inspire and influence nationally and internationally.
Hull House was not only a settlement house for the poor, but also offered opportunity for working class people, offered several innovative programs, and set immigrants on track to success. Hull House offered more than just a place to help the poor get back on their feet, as it expanded to 13 buildings by 1907, just 18 years after its opening. Among these several buildings were a gym, theater, art gallery, and several educational and social programs, all of which were free to the public. Hull House was established in a very diverse neighborhood, with immigrants from all over Europe in need of aid and education. Besides immigrants, working class individuals enjoyed the same benefit of education. Hull House was created to help the extensive amount of immigrants pouring into the city so that they may learn to live the full lives they deserve. After traveling around Europe, Jane Addams found her inspiration for the house in London. Realizing that she could finally have her chance to make an impact on society and help the people who need it the most, she quickly returned to her hometown in Chicago. Ultimately, Jane Addams' first priority with the house would be to help those in need and get people back on their feet so that Chicago may be a more suitable place for everyone. Hull House soon became very popular among the city as it was host to nearly 2,000 people every week. Most of the immigrants who occupied the house were German, Jewish, or Italian, but it also included a diversity of other Europeans. Hull House also attracted many female residents, which helped them to become prominent reformers. Ultimately, Hull House was able to address the issues of child labor, women's suffrage, healthcare reform, and immigration policy. With the help of Hull House, the Chicago could return to the gleaming city it was meant to be.
Hull House left a lasting impact on other settlement houses, educational institutions, and social welfare programs. For one, the Hull House organization lived on, helping the less fortunate up until 2012, when it abruptly closed due to financial difficulties. Although no longer around, Hull House still influenced areas. Adams sought to teach by example rather than leave learning to individual study. This still appears in many of today's institutions. Adams' experience at Hull House also allowed her to conduct several studies on society's problems, such as overcrowding. This, in particular, led to several campaigns to improve sanitation and building codes. Many of these were successful, Adams defeating the bureaucrats who had no regard for the common people. Adams spoke of the
Undoubted powers of public recreation to bring together the classes of a community in modern city, unhappily so full of devices for keeping them apart. Hull House's offerings to the impoverished immigrant population left many souls with the opportunity to new life. Several issues during the turn of the century were improved, if not solved, by Jane Addams' contributions. These led to a Nobel Peace Prize, highlighting the high points of Addams' charitable life. The legacy of Hull House lives on. Even though its doors have closed, the contributions to thousands of lives still thrives to this day.